Welcome back, my friends. We're here once again with Pastor Bruce Dowell, and we've been talking about the Messianic movement and how important it is to the church, how the church is falling away and people just aren't fully understanding what's going on. They're not getting fed, they're not being nurtured the way they need to be. And with almost 100 churches a day closing, and that's just in the United States, I believe.
Yeah.
That's traumatic. What can we do, and what do we need to realize to step up, to bring the word, to make sure that we are ready to bring the word to the people, and to realize that every person has a unique and different need? So, Pastor, as we've been talking about this, we can see that so many of the churches treat people as a common entity. And yet we can see that environment makes a difference. If you're a farm community, you're brought up a lot different than if you're in a city community.
Right.
You're brought up a lot different than even if you're in a rural community.
Mm-hmm.
And your beliefs, your thought processes tend to be different. The message you receive needs to be unique for your group.
Right.
You need to realize that people are unique and that we need to establish a way to communicate with the people different from what's rote. Pastor, you mentioned a little while ago that since we have two congregations, one up here in Crestline and one down in Calamasa, the groups are different.
Completely.
And the way you approach them is different.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of getting to know your people and starting to reach them where they're at, and not as a common denominator. So how do you think we need to approach this, and what are some of the things that let you know how different they are and how to approach them?
Well, that's a good question and a big subject.
Yes, it is.
As you mentioned, we have the two congregations, one here in Crestline. We're a mountain community.
Right.
Small. I remember when we got our first 7-Eleven came into town, it was like we had demonstrations. When the first light signal was put in, and we only have two, even today, but when the first one was put in, it was a major uproar. And such an uproar, they took it out.
Wow.
And then put it back years later. But we're a rural, place. People come to the mountains for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons is to escape. So we have that escape type of mentality.
Right.
We have a mountain man type of mentality that, just get out of my way and leave me alone.
A lot of the people are very independent.
Very independent. So that's our one congregation. Our other congregation is down in what we call the Flatlands, down in the valley, the Inland Empire. And these are people that are... Many of the people that live in the Inland Empire are displaced Orange County people.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
When Orange County became too expensive, they moved east to the Inland Empire. But they have that mentality that they have part of that Orange County mentality of materialism and work hard ethic and buy the house in suburbia and put up the fence and mind your own business and that kind of thing. So for spiritual leaders like us and our eldership team, we have to seek the Lord on how to fulfill the mandate that Yeshua spoke, feed my sheep.
Right.
Because they're different. Now I give the same message up the hill and down the hill every week.
Right. Well, I've heard them both, and they're not exactly the same.
They're the same set of notes, but they are different.
Yes, they are.
They're very different. And because each part of this congregation, we call it one congregation, two locations, as you know, and this part of the congregation is different from that part of the congregation, and so you address them differently.
Exactly.
You, the congregation up here might need discipline in whatever this message is.
Right.
And the one down the hill is maybe doing very well in this particular area.
Yeah.
See, so they don't need to be disciplined.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
We might have to encourage one congregation to get the lead out.
Yeah.
And we might need to encourage the other congregation to slow down a little bit. We've experienced all of these things.
And from my perspective, I've heard in both places, and I've gotten things out of both messages.
Yeah.
So it works.
You actually could go to both services and get almost a different message.
Yeah.
Oftentimes. And that's because when I'm up here, I'm the mountain mentality.
Absolutely.
When I'm down there, I'm the flatland mentality.
Right.
Become all things to all men is what it says. So in our endeavor to spread the messianic message, we have to, as individuals, we all have to take on that same mentality.
Exactly.
Become all things to all men. What does that mean? That means figure out where they're coming from. What are their interests? What are their likes, their dislikes? What is their thought process? What do they put stock in, and what don't they put stock in? What's valuable? What isn't valuable to them?
Well, I think in the Word itself is a good example of that. If you look at the letters, who were the letters for? They were to each individual group. The Philippians, the Ephesians, the Corinthians,
right,
and on.
Exactly.
The Galatians, each individual group had different needs and needed to be addressed differently.
And that's really what Rabbi Shaul was doing.
Exactly.
I mean, if somebody at Ephesus had gotten the Galatian papers, it might have made absolutely no sense.
Correct.
Now we have the advantage now; it's all compiled together into the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament.
Right.
And it cuts right across the board, and there's a little bit in each letter that affects you. But some of the letters are like, well, whatever.
Exactly, and that's the same as your messages.
Yeah, same thing.
But you get something out of each one of them.
You get a little something out of each. You typically, though, probably don't get a nugget out of every single one, because that's for that special time when it just really hits you between the eyes.
That's true.
And other than that, it's kind of a scattergun effect. You try to hit everybody with a little something rather than hit one or two with a big old cannonball.
Well, yeah, and you're addressing hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And like we discussed a little bit earlier, every person has a different need and receives things a little bit differently.
They do. Even on this radio show, I mean, you'll talk to one person and they'll say, well, man, I got this out of the
Exactly.
talk, and the next person will say, man, I didn't even hear that.
Right.
This is what I got.
Exactly.
And that's just how it is. You're not going to hit everybody with everything.
Right.
Now, when you're evangelizing, and when we're sharing the Messianic, even with believers, we're evangelizing.
Correct.
We're sharing the good news.
Correct.
What is the good news? Well, the good news is I took a step in this direction that you haven't taken.
Right.
And it's good news.
Right.
Excuse me, so here it is.
Right.
Right? So you share that on that with that person to reach them, to draw them in. So what is going to draw them?
Yes.
You can't just go out there with the 4 spiritual laws anymore and just...
No, you can't.
Get people that way. You have to go much deeper. You have to be much more sensitive, in my opinion.
Well, I think so, and I think that's one of the reasons the Word says, let the Ruach, let the Holy Spirit guide you. Because everybody's an individual, and you can't know all their characteristics.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's why we want to fill our quiver with a lot of arrows.
Exactly.
You want to have a lot of tools in your toolbox.
We want to be the storehouse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when we're approaching people in the Messianic, or when we're in the Messianic, we're approaching them with the Messianic message, we have to be very, very sensitive as well, because our message is almost 180 degrees out.
Yes.
From the normal church message. So you don't want to approach somebody and heap coals of condemnation on their head.
Correct.
Because, to be perfectly honest, most people are struggling not to heap condemnation on themselves.
Well, that's true.
So if you come along and say, well, you're doing it all wrong, that really doesn't...
That doesn't help.
It doesn't help things that much. You've got to lay out a very concise, really a draw,
right?
A midrash,
right. Yeah,
an argument to win them. And if you're going to have a winning argument, you have to know who you're arguing.
Exactly.
Against. So, very important for us to get that down. I think there's a lot of different vehicles. There's a lot of different ways. One is what we're doing here on the radio.
Right.
Hebrew Nation Radio, but there'll be Christians that tune into it.
Right.
There'll be some non-believers that tune into it.
Oh, yes.
We're probably trying to focus mostly on those Christians that are actually hunting and searching right now and looking for more. That is really our target audience.
Right.
More than anyone. So if they're looking for more and they tune into what we're speaking, something's bound to catch their attention fairly quickly that would cause them to hang in there and listen to the rest.
Right.
So this is the same thing. We evangelize on the mountain differently than down the hill. Right now we're looking into it. We're exploring the idea of doing a community Passover up here as an outreach.
Wow, that would be great.
To see how that goes, because the community up here has dinners together, community dinners. That's part of the culture up here.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be part of the culture in a lot of rural churches.
Yeah. And not so much anymore, but up here It still has a certain following.
Yes.
And it's not a foreign concept to most of the people up here.
Right.
We have the Sam Ritz Lodge, which is kind of a community center, not in name only. It really is a community type center.
Right.
And people down the hill don't even have any comprehension of what that is.
Yeah.
The community center, and every other building down there is named community center, but it really isn't a community center. So you deal with people differently. So I think that we have to really seek God. We've got to get the message. We've got to have the message understood in our own mind and heart very clearly first and foremost.
Right.
So you can pass it on, because when you're witnessing to somebody, when you're sharing the good news with somebody, in our society, you don't have very long.
That's true.
You have seconds or maybe a couple minutes.
Yeah, and if you don't catch their attention then, it's gone.
You've got to catch them in the first couple seconds, or they're not going to hang around.
Yes.
Because everyone's on the move. Everyone's in the fast lane in our society. So we have to figure out, for wherever we live, and I'm talking to the radio now, we all live in different communities.
Right.
So, for instance, up here, you go to the grocery store, it's not uncommon to run into somebody you know and stand there and talk for 40 minutes in the grocery store. That never happens down the hill.
No, it doesn't.
You don't talk to anybody down there for 40 minutes in the grocery store. Everyone just wants to get in and out.
Exactly.
And so So for all of our listeners, we have to really seek God on wisdom for reaching people. And whether we're giving them the gospel on how to be saved, or whether we're giving the gospel on how to make a jump from the Christian church into the Messianic, you still have to seek God on all of that.
You absolutely do. And one of the reasons for that, and we had a class just not too long ago, but when you look at people, you've got to realize that every single person is unique.
Yeah.
They were made unique for God's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so we can all fit together. If we weren't unique, we probably wouldn't get everything done.
Yeah.
Or be so overwhelmed that we would lose out that way. But because we're unique, each one can support the other one. You can fill in with what the other person doesn't have. You can fill in. And that's the way God designed it. He wants us all to be ahad, one, come together, learn what the other person needs, and touch them where they need to be touched.
Yeah.
And when you start doing that, when you start realizing one message doesn't fit all, one word doesn't fit all, but you can start listening to the Ruach, because that's the only way, then you can get the message out to them.
Right.
We proved in one of our last classes that if you took the number of characteristics in a person and listed them down and then started ordering them, if you take the order of those and multiply it out, you can find out that there's very likely zero people in this world that are exactly like you. That's amazing, because you figure there's millions and millions of people here on this earth. Why is there nobody that's like me? Well, that's God's purpose. That's the way He wants us.
Yeah.
But we need to start realizing that and reaching people where they're at, not just where we're at,
Right.
or where we think they're at.
That's exactly right. That's one reason we shouldn't be relying on the pastor to give the good news.
Right.
Because if you can train your people to go out and minister amongst the congregation, then you're one-on-one.
Exactly.
And people, maybe you brought a friend. If you brought a friend to the congregation, you know that person better than I do.
Correct.
My job is to lead the whole congregation as a whole in this journey.
Correct.
Because God's brought us together, and He's made us of one mind, one spirit, one Lord, all
Exactly.
all of that. And so my job is to move us like this, not to reach these certain individuals that come.
Right.
It's the congregation's job to do that. Get with the person, meet them, take them out to lunch after service, and really get to know them, whatever.
Well, and I think that was one advantage that the older or more rural churches used to have. They were a lot of times family. You would come together. A lot of times you'd have an oneg or a meal together at the church, or go out afterwards. But you knew everybody. You could fellowship with the. You could talk about it. You could say, "Well, I didn't understand this. What was your take on it?"
Yeah.
And you know, in that way, you can start reaching one another.
Right.
But when you get down to the one-on-one level, like you were just saying, it makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah, and in Southern California, we've kind of lost that potluck oneg thing. You know, the problem is, in our churches, we really don't know very many people very well.
That's true.
Because everyone pulls into the parking lot at 5 minutes to 10, rushes to get their seats, and as soon as the message is over, you rush off to whatever your plans are.
That's true.
And and while you're there together, you're listening to the pastor speak.
Right.
So So if you have this oneg or this potluck or this meal after the service, you can use that time to get to know some people better, but it's still hard because you're seated at tables with six or eight people, and usually the decibel level is fairly high.
Yes.
And you're almost having to shout across your table to be heard. And I find it just doesn't work that well.
Not like it used to.
You can't get into serious things. That's the part that bothers me the most, because I'm not really one to just sit down and talk about nothing.
Correct.
That's not me, who I am.
Right.
I can spend hours talking about something that has some substance.
Right.
But just to talk about the weather, I'd rather be off doing whatever I want to do, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I don't want to sit at a table and shout across the table about, what about them Dodgers,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And so what happens is you end up not really building the relationship in that you'd like.
Right.
Now, obviously, sometimes you get a breakthrough or whatever, but you're going to be better off one-on-one with people.
Yes.
And the old adage, birds of a feather flock together. You'll be drawn to certain people. You're drawn to certain people that I wouldn't be drawn to.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
vice versa. And the people that you're drawn to, you can speak into their life, whereas I can't.
Correct.
So the burden then falls on you to reach this person with the messianic message.
Correct.
Which means you've got to know it.
Yes.
It's not enough for me to know it.
Exactly.
You can't say, well, the pastor says this, because they're not going to come and talk to me.
Right.
But they are going to talk to you.
Right.
So you've got to know your stuff. I think that's huge in the messianic. In the church, it wasn't as big a deal, because in the church the message is a lot less complex.
And not as controversial.
Not as controversial because it's the old standard.
Correct.
Here you got the Roman road, and here's the spiritual laws, and
yeah,
and you want to say the sinner's prayer, and and it's everyone in the whole congregation is going to say the same thing.
Right.
That's not the case in the Messianic.
No.
In the Messianic, there's so many areas of focal point. I mean, if somebody comes to your congregation because they're wondering about the feasts and festivals, that's the focal point.
Right.
So maybe this person's feasts and festivals, maybe this one's Shabbat, maybe this one is eating clean.
Right.
They all have different concerns. So you've got to be able to focus in on each one of those.
Yeah, and one of my big things was the Hebrew mindset.
Huge.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference in how you look at things.
It's huge. And that's another thing. We, as Messianic believers, we have to take on the Hebrew mindset.
Absolutely.
So otherwise, a lot of the stuff doesn't make sense.
Correct.
See, so it's incumbent on every single person to seek God, get the mind of God, and then take the good news out to the people.
Absolutely. And my friends, that's all the time we have for today. But please, if you want to get Pastor Bruce's books, go to PastorBruceDowell.com or to Amazon.com. And if you want to see us on YouTube, go to www.ShilohMessianic.com and check out our YouTube section. And then until next time, Shalom.
Shalom.